Late spring, 1945. Somewhere in Western Europe, night settles quietly over a fenced American prisoner of war camp. The war, only miles away, still rumbles like distant thunder. But inside the wire, there is an unfamiliar silence. Canvas tents barely move in the cool air. Floodlights hum softly. Boots no longer march. Inside one of the barracks, a group of newly captured women stand motionless. Many wear worn uniforms. Some are nurses, some clerks, some auxiliaries pulled into a collapsing war. Their faces carry exhaustion carved by years of shortages, bombings, and retreat. Then they are told to sleep. They approach the bunks cautiously. Mattresses are thick, springs hold firm. Sheets are clean. Blankets are heavy and warm. No straw, no bare boards, no lice. One woman presses her hand down slowly, unsure if the softness is real. Another sits, then freezes, as if the bed itself might vanish. For months, sometimes years, comfort had not existed. Now it is beneath them. That moment, quiet and deeply human, did not come from kindness alone. It came from a war shaped by systems, doctrine, and choices made long before these women were captured. And to understand it, we must step back. By the time these women were taken into American custody, the Second World War in Europe was entering its final, violent phase. It was early 1945. The German front lines had fractured. Cities lay in ruins. Supply networks had collapsed under relentless Allied bombing, and the rapid advance from both West and East. Women had become an essential part of the Axis war machine. As male manpower disappeared into the front lines, women filled the gaps. They served as nurses, radio operators, clerks, factory workers, air defense auxiliaries, and camp staff. Many were not ideological soldiers. They were functionaries of a system under strain, bound by duty, coercion, or survival. When Allied forces pushed deep into Germany and occupied former Axis-held territory, they encountered these women in hospitals, administrative centers, and retreating columns. Some surrendered willingly. Others were captured during chaotic withdrawals. American units, operating under strict military protocols, processed them not as civilians, but as prisoners of war when their roles met legal definitions under international law. This distinction mattered. Prisoner of war status carried obligations. The United States, unlike many collapsing regimes, still possessed intact logistics, functioning transport, and industrial depth. Its army moved forward with supply lines measured not in desperation, but in abundance. For these women, the capture marked the end of hunger marches, overcrowded shelters, and sleeping on concrete floors. Yet fear remained. They had been told for years what Americans would do to prisoners. The wire ahead of them was not just a boundary, it was an unknown. And what awaited them inside those camps was shaped by a very different military philosophy. American. Prisoner of war camps in Europe were not improvised holding pens. They were extensions of a doctrine developed years before the first landing craft touched Normandy. The United States Army planned for captivity as a logistical problem, not an emotional one. Prisoners were to be controlled, documented, housed, and fed according to regulation. By 1944, These systems were mature. Camps were built with standardized layouts. Barracks or tents were issued with cots, mattresses, blankets, and heating when possible. Bedding was not a luxury, it was a line item. Rations followed fixed caloric calculations, often matching or exceeding those of front-line troops. Medical inspections were routine. Discipline was strict but predictable. This adherence was not accidental. The United States was a signatory to the Geneva Convention, and compliance was both a legal obligation and a strategic decision. Proper treatment of prisoners reduced unrest, limited disease, and reinforced a moral distinction the Allies believed mattered. The contrast was impossible to ignore. For those arriving from Axis-controlled territory, on the Eastern Front, captivity often meant death in Germany itself. Years of bombing and scarcity had reduced even civilian life to ration cards and cold floors. Beds, when they existed, were shared. Mattresses were rare. Straw was common. So when these women were escorted into American camps, issued clean bedding, and told to sleep, disbelief replaced terror. The war had taught them that surrender meant suffering. Instead, it offered silence, order, and a bed that did not collapse beneath them. That quiet contradiction would echo far beyond the wire. The shock was not comfort alone. It was disorientation for many of the women. The softness of an American bed felt unreal because deprivation had reshaped their expectations. Months of sleeping in shelters, corridors, trucks, or bombed-out buildings had trained the body to stay tense even at rest. Muscles did not release easily. Sleep came in fragments. Comfort was associated with danger. Warmth attracted bombs. Light invited air raids. And now, in captivity, the body was asked to trust again. Some lay awake for hours, staring at canvas ceilings or wooden beams. Others slept immediately, their exhaustion overpowering suspicion. The mattress, thick and evenly supported, did something the war had rarely allowed. It removed pain. Joints loosened. Backs stopped aching for the first time in years. Waking did not begin with stiffness and dread. This physical relief triggered something deeper. If the enemy provided this, then the image they had been given was incomplete. American brutality had been a constant theme in Axis propaganda, yet the evidence beneath them contradicted it silently, without argument. There was guilt in that realization. Comfort felt undeserved. Some women later recalled crying quietly, not from gratitude, but from confusion. The war had taught them who to fear. The bed suggested something else. And once doubt entered, it did not leave easily. That doubt would deepen as daily life inside the camps unfolded. The beds were not acts of individual kindness. They were products of scale. By 1945, the United States possessed an industrial and logistical system unmatched by any nation in the war. Factories produced not only tanks and aircraft, but mattresses, blankets, medical supplies, and standardized camp equipment in enormous quantities. Comfort was not emotional, it was institutional. American military doctrine viewed order as a weapon. Clean camps reduced illness. Adequate sleep reduced unrest. Predictable routines prevented violence. Every bed issued was a calculation, not a gesture. Yet for those lying on them, The effect was deeply personal. This system also reflected a moral position. The United States sought to distinguish itself from its enemies not only on the battlefield, but in conduct. Proper treatment of prisoners reinforced Allied legitimacy and undermined Axis narratives. Every well-run camp was a quiet counter-argument. 2 years of propaganda. For the female prisoners, this created a moral tension. They had been part of a system that denied dignity to others. Now, they were receiving it from an enemy. The contrast was not lost on them. Some resisted the implication. Others absorbed it slowly, in silence. The bed became a symbol not of mercy, but of a different way of waging war. One where power expressed itself through control, restraint, and material certainty. And it was during the first night, when exhaustion finally overcame fear, that this realization fully took hold. The first night was the moment everything shifted. Lights dimmed at a fixed hour. Guards took their positions outside the barracks. Inside, the sounds of the camp settled into a steady rhythm. Footsteps on gravel, a distant generator, the low murmur of voices fading into sleep. For many of the women, this was the first night. In years without explosions, no sirens, no aircraft engines, no orders shouted in panic. Just darkness, contained and deliberate. They lay still, testing the silence. Some waited for the familiar interruption that never came. Others pressed their hands into the mattress again, as if to confirm it had not been imagined. The springs held. The fabric did not tear. Nothing was taken away. Reports from Allied interrogations and post-war memoirs would later describe this night not as relief, but as collapse. The body, no longer braced for impact, finally surrendered. Sleep arrived suddenly and deeply, unbroken by fear. In that surrender, something else occurred. The war's constant tension, the belief that suffering was inevitable, cracked, not through ideology or argument, but through experience. The enemy had not only defeated them, it had out-resourced them, outlasted them, and now it was out-ordering them. By morning, the women would wake changed, though none could yet explain how. That understanding would sharpen in the hours that followed. Morning arrived without urgency. Sunlight filtered through tense seams and narrow windows. A bugle sounded in the distance, not as a threat, but as routine. The women stirred slowly, disoriented by uninterrupted sleep. Some woke in the same position they had fallen into, something that had not happened since before. The war. For a brief moment, there was confusion. Then memory returned. The fence, the guards, the surrender, and the bed. The realization was unsettling. Captivity was supposed to be harsher than freedom. Instead, their bodies felt stronger than they had in months. Hunger was present, but measured. Fear lingered, but dulled. Breakfast followed on schedule. Bread, coffee, rations consistent and predictable. No shouting, no chaos. The war outside continued. But inside the camp, time moved differently. This was the turning point, not because the prisoners had changed sides, but because certainty had been broken. The enemy was no longer a single image. It was fragmented, complex, and uncomfortably humane. For some, this produced resentment. For others, relief. but for all. It forced recognition. The war they had believed in had failed not only militarily, but structurally. The bed, simple and silent, had done what years of fighting could not. It exposed the imbalance beneath the ideology. That imbalance would shape how captivity was remembered and how the war would be understood. Long after it ended, life inside American prisoner of war camps settled into routine. Days were regulated by schedules posted and enforced without deviation. Roll calls, work details, medical checks, meals served at fixed hours. The predictability itself became a form of stability. For the female prisoners, conditions remained consistent. They were housed separately from male POWs, monitored closely, and assigned duties deemed appropriate under military regulations. Sanitation was maintained. Clothing was issued when necessary. Illness, though present, was treated. Comparisons were unavoidable. Stories circulated quietly among prisoners of camps under other armies, of starvation, of overcrowding, of violence. The American camps stood apart not because they were kind, but because they were functional. Their efficiency reflected a nation still capable of sustaining systems even at war's end. Over time, the initial shock of the beds faded, but the memory did not. It became a reference point, a dividing line between what had been endured and what was now experienced. For many, it was the first signal that the war was truly over for them. Yet captivity was still captivity. The fences remained. The guards remained. Freedom was distant. What lingered most was not gratitude, but a quiet reckoning, one that would follow these women long after the camps were dismantled. After the war, memories of captivity emerged slowly. In interviews, letters, and later testimonies, former prisoners struggled to explain the contradiction they had lived through. They had lost a war. They had been detained by an enemy. Yet some of the most humane conditions they experienced came after surrender. The beds appeared again and again in these accounts, not as symbols of comfort, but of disbelief. They represented a moment when the narrative they had been given collapsed under physical reality. No speech had done that. No interrogation, just rest. This did not erase guilt or responsibility. Many of these women understood the system they had served. Captivity did not absolve it, but it complicated memory. The enemy had not matched the image they had feared. For historians, these recollections offered insight into how material conditions shape perception. Power expressed through restraint left deeper impressions than cruelty ever could. The American camps became examples of how logistics, law, and discipline influenced not only outcomes, but memory itself. As time passed, the war hardened into dates and numbers, but certain sensations remained vivid. The feel of a mattress, the weight of a blanket, the silence of a night without fear. And it is in those quiet details that the final meaning of this story rests. War is often remembered through violence, through battles, losses, and destruction measured in numbers. But for those who lived it, history is also carried in quieter moments, small experiences that reveal deeper truths. For these women, the softness of an American bed became one such moment. It was not kindness in the personal sense. It was the outcome of a system that valued order, planning, and restraint even while waging total war. In that restraint, power spoke without shouting. The bed did not change the past. It did not undo suffering or absolve responsibility, but it disrupted certainty. It showed that warfare was not only decided by ideology or courage, but by logistics, discipline, and the ability to sustain humanity under pressure. In the end, the war was not remembered only by who fired the last shot, but by how victory was carried afterward, through camps run by regulation instead of revenge, through silence instead of chaos, long after uniforms were folded away and fences dismantled. These women remembered the moment their bodies finally rested, not because it was comfortable, but because it revealed what the war had taken, and what it could have been. History often turns on grand events, but sometimes it turns on a mattress. And the quiet realization that even in war, how you win matters.